And so verse 14, for those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country for which they had come out, they would have the opportunity to return. But now they desire a better. They desire a better. That is a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. But God is not ashamed of them because of their faith. Goes on, by faith, Abram, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called. That's the story of Abram being given this promised son, Isaac, and then being told to offer him back to God. And when he decided to take him up, and you have to understand, if you look at that story, Isaac, when Abram begins to offer him up, when Abraham offers him up, Isaac is not a little boy. Isaac, he understands when they go into the mountain. Isaac understands how you offer to God. And when they go up into the mountain for the offering, Isaac says, Dad, where's the offering? And Abraham says, the Lord will provide. And when he gets up there and prepares to offer up Isaac, there's a ram in the bush that God allows Abram to offer in its place, not to show Abraham or not to convince God of Abram, the extent of Abraham's faith, but to test Abraham so that he understands the extent of his faith. And so, but because of the depth of Abraham's faith, God says that through your seed, all of the earth, all of the families of the earth would be blessed. Isaac would then bless Jacob and Esau. So here is how those blessings are now beginning to happen intergenerationally. So we talk a lot, you hear a lot in church about generational curses. What I like about this story is it lets us know that there is a such thing as generational blessings. And what we see here is the generational blessings from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and on and on and on. By faith, Isaac would bless Jacob and then Esau, or Jacob and Esau rather, concerning the things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of his sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. He goes on about the faith of Moses and talks about that faith. And I'll talk about the rest of this looking at the time. I want to leave some time for discussion and or questions. And so I'm going to stop here and we'll pick up with verse 23 through the end of 11. I'm going to make reference to some things. And matter of fact, I'm going to make this reference in 10 because I want to make some references in 12 next week as well. So if you look at chapter 10 in Hebrews, beginning at verse 26, I'm going to read a little bit here. It says, for if we sin willfully after we receive the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation, which will devour the adversaries. Anyone who rejected Moses' laws dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much worse punishment do you suppose will be the thought worthy who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, counted the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified a common thing, and insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. But recall the former days in which, after you were illuminated or informed, you endured a great struggle with sufferings, partly while you were made a spectacle, both by reproaches and tribulations, and partly while you become companions of those who were treated, for you had compassion on me in my chains, and joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have a better and an enduring possession for yourselves in heaven. Therefore, do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward, for you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith. But if anyone who draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe in the saving of the soul. I'm going to say something real quick about this because I don't want to leave out some things that I read. There's a discussion out there about people, about we call it eternal salvation. And I remember in divinity school, I had to write this paper about it. And I talked about, eternal salvation. And then many of us grew up being taught that a person who confessed Christ, but then said that they didn't believe anymore, they had never really confessed him. And so they said that if you confess Christ, eternal salvation would mean that if you confess Christ, you could never, it says he will in no wise cast them out. But it's clear here that where the writer here talks about some who confessed, but then turned away, they're called apostates. And so there is a discussion about people who turn away, which then lets us know that there are people who had come into the faith, yet turned away from the faith that they came into. And I would say the only way that argument holds is from the perspective of God, because God knows the beginning and the end. But for people who are living their lives forward without the benefit of knowing their future or the future of others, what they see is someone who truly believed, but now who truly walks away. He says, because the just live by faith. We live by faith. And then he goes on into this study about what faith is, and then examples of people who lived their faith as substance and evidence. So don't forget, next week, we've got to come in and somebody's got to explain to me or talk about the definitions of substance and evidence. And I'm going to take it, apply it to some things that we've talked about already, and then move forward with those two definitions in how people, when we talk about the prophets of old, these old stalwarts of faith, use their faith as substance and evidence. I talked about this word fact. I'm going to talk about it again on next week, that their faith made what they were told facts. We're going to talk about what this fact is. But their faith made what they were told, though they couldn't see it, it became substance and evidence. It became their facts. And those facts that they understood by their faith drove them to an action that was consistent with their faith. And they then obtained what they did not physically see, but their faith allowed them to see as evidence and substance. It drove them to an action consistent with that faith. And then what they saw in the spirit materialized in the natural. And so Abraham left on the promise of a land that his descendants would inherit. He didn't see it when he left. God allowed them to walk in it and dwell in it intense. But he did not live to see his descendants obtain it, but it was through his faith that descendants yet unborn would be intergenerationally blessed, because there's a such thing as a generational blessing, in the same way that we talk about generational curses. And because of the work, the life, the movement, the actions of Abraham that was consistent with his faith. Think about what James told us, that faith without a corresponding work is a dead faith, that Abraham had faith, his actions were consistent with that faith. He left to go to a land that God would show him, and he didn't wait, well, show me and I'll leave, give it to me and I'll go possess it. He moved based on his faith. His actions were consistent with his faith. His actions, his faith was the substance and the evidence of what was to come. He died and his descendants did not possess it, but they possessed it because of his faith. They were blessed generations later. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, the 12 children. And then later, the descendants would possess the promised land because of the faith of Father Abraham. And we have to understand today that generations yet unborn will be blessed based on the decisions we make today. That if we move based on our faith, that the promises of God, here's Abraham, didn't see his descendants possess it, but they saw themselves possess it because of the faith of their ancestor Abraham. So faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. And so as we continue in this study over the next couple weeks, I want to take some time to dive into this study. And again, my prayer is that this study will help us to strengthen our faith. And we're going to talk a little bit about mustard seed faith. And we're going to go into this study, but I'm excited about where this study takes us. And I'm believing God that through it, that it will strengthen all of our faith.